everyone. I was looking forward to not shaking hands with many of you this week in Orlando. But I really want to give a shout out to Ricky and One Up Health for putting together this rapidly assembled virtual conference. It's a really great event. It's a momentous week, obviously, in the lifetime of HL7 FHIR with the release of the final rules, which really gives a certain stature and importance to what we're doing. And it really makes the march towards interoperability much more tangible. And I do greatly appreciate the fact that what we're seeing is a rapid maturing of the use of FHIR as a core standard for achieving interoperability. And the Fireball Initiative, which is a marketing collaborative of several companies working to provide complementary products and services for based on FHIR, I think is a really good milestone for the FHIR community and for healthcare in general. It indicates a maturing of the marketplace. It basically substantiates a core principle of the FHIR community, which is people working together and collaborating interactively to really make a significant difference in the way we use healthcare information and the way we're trying to improve interoperability within the overall healthcare marketplace. And so I think this is a great event. And I think in addition to Ricky, Rien, and James, I think we'll also be joined shortly by Sandy Vance from Aegis, which is the fourth member. I'd like to start things out with the question of asking each of you to give a brief introductory statement about what you see as the purpose. Let's start with Rien. What's the purpose of the Alliance? How does your particular organization participate and offer for it? And why did you join? And what caused you to start this initiative going? So we'll start with you, Rien, and then we'll follow up with James, Ricky, and Sandy.
Right. Well, thank you, Wayne. I was just going to thank the One Up Health team for running this event as well, and I'm doing that again. I think it's amazing. We have some experience with running events like with HL7. We run Dev Days, FHIR Dev Days. It takes us around 6 to 8 months to prepare for an edition, and you're doing it over the weekend. It's unbelievable. So thank you very much. Maybe a few words of introduction. We're FHIRly. I'm currently in Amsterdam, where our main office is. We're one of the co-creators of FHIR, and we maintain some of the, let's say, essential tools for the FHIR community and FHIR implementers. We can talk more about that, but maybe a few words about why is there the FHIR Business Alliance? So the FHIR Business Alliance is a marketing collaborative between currently 4 founding members, One Up Health, Aegis, Smile CDR in Canada, and FHIRly in the Netherlands. And we, the purpose of the Alliance is to help grow the market for FHIR products and services. And if you look at the FHIR community, you will see many perspectives that are represented in there, like, you know, the doctor, the patient, the IT folk, the policy people, etc. And we want to speak for another group, which is we take the commercial perspective. We believe that FHIR is also an economic driver for new companies or established companies to come up with new propositions. And we want to help grow that market for FHIR products and FHIR services. And we've known each other for a long time. We were just having a chat at one of the FHIR meetings, and we were figuring why compete, because we're also competitors in a way sometimes. Why compete if we have more to gain from collaborating and helping grow that market for mature FHIR products and services? And that's what the FHIR Business Alliance, or Fireball, actually is.
James, why don't you go next? And I've noticed on video here that I'm not doing a great job of not touching my face, so we will.
I was just thinking the same thing about myself.
Oops.
No kidding. Well, so that's kind of a great segue. So, I mean, first off, I absolutely want to reiterate the same thank you. There I go again, to the One Up Health team for organizing this. Organizing events is hard at the best of times, and this is an incredible circumstance to be organizing events. I'm personally feeling a little bit discombobulated today. We as a company at Smile CDR just decided that we were going to completely move to a virtual office strategy, sort of in response to the ongoing pandemic situation. So this is literally day one, hour one, in fact, of working from home for me, which is a fascinating thing. So I'm sitting here joined by our corporate head of security, Dharma, who's sitting next to me. We're still trying to figure out how we can co-work in this space together. That's fun. A little bit of background. So a tiny bit about myself. I am not a marketing person, nor a business person, to be totally blunt. Those are not skills I possess. My background is in technology, and specifically, I've been leading open source projects around health interoperability for roughly 18 years now. So my comfortable space, of course, is talking to developers and sitting in quiet rooms by myself writing code. This whole thing is always a little bit foreign to me. And there's a reason I'm saying all of this. FHIR, we within the Happy community that I've been leading for years have been sort of quietly doing our thing and building communities of interested techies and developers. We've been doing this for a long time. And I've always really loved the spirit of open source. I've loved the sort of collaboration. I've loved the transparency. I've loved the sort of commitment to helping each other and all of that open source brings to the world. And I've been drawn to that since I learned to program, really. FHIR has been a fascinating thing to me. I mean, FHIR, of course, is, if we're honest, still in its infancy. It's still not even quite 10 years old, which I guess in some ways makes it a dinosaur in technology terms, but in many ways makes it a sort of a newcomer in the space that we're all in. And FHIR has been fascinating just in the way that, among other things, it's brought a lot of that open source ethos to a field that traditionally doesn't work with those same values of sort of openness and transparency and collaboration. FHIR, in particular, I will draw attention to the FHIR Connectathon events that happen 3 to 4 times a year, which are these incredible sort of collaborative events where people sit together, people often from arch rival vendors, people from all kinds of different backgrounds, sit at tables and solve problems together. FHIR has just provided this incredible platform, obviously in terms of technology, but also in terms of community building and process and attitude, frankly, that I think is overdue, is long overdue in healthcare. And if we're honest, probably long overdue in other industries too. Our work at Smile CDR, of course, transcends all kinds of things going on with FHIR. We're working with governments to build health infrastructure at national and subnational levels. We're working with payers for consumer empowerment and APIs, which of course is all the rage these days, with providers to do analytics and to unlock data and to stand up sort of innovative apps. Often working with startups to help them bring their ideas to market faster, and sort of threaded through all of the things I mentioned and all kinds of other projects that we find ourselves tangled up in these days. We're working with, as Rien said, we're working with our competitors in this amazing collaborative way constantly. All 4 of the members of the Fireball Alliance, and of course, all kinds of other companies who are involved in this space. We find ourselves sharing boardroom tables, more often virtual these days, and probably for the next while, but we find ourselves in the same room, sort of doing collaboration constantly. And I think it's that exact spirit that, to me at least, completely underlines why Fireball makes sense. We are an alliance of sort of people who share these values of collaboration. And for that, I feel honored to be a part of it. And I think I will stop there.
Yeah, thanks, James. And we'll have, Sandy's trying to join, so hopefully she jumps on very soon.
But Ricky, for One Up Health.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for this. We, I mean, it was our whole team. There is a total lift from 0 to conference in 4 or 5 days. So we appreciate noticing that. So at One Up Health, what we're doing is we're basically helping healthcare organizations get connected to EHR data, primarily using FHIR. And the way that we got involved is I was working with Anish Chopra, was at Care Journey, and Anish had started this thing called the Argonaut Project, which was essentially a coalition of the willing. And that's where I met, James and Rien and others, including Graham and Sandy and the Aegis team and many others in the FHIR community. And at that time, I saw that there is a lot that is going to be required from organizations to really take advantage of FHIR. But it was a case where there are many new entrants into the space. The overall interest in FHIR and interoperability was growing. And essentially, it was a rising tide lifts all boats scenario. So even though at some level, we're competitive with other players in the FHIR space, there is enough FHIR to go around in which, there's more, essentially it's doubling every year or two in the amount of interest that there is in the standard. So what that means is that kind of the basics of FHIR need to be supported by organizations that just make it easier for newcomers in the space, but also provide opportunity for organizations to build off of a foundational layer so that you can do more specific things like treat patients with specific medication, medications or backgrounds or conditions, or support provider organizations that need, pop health analytics use cases, or support providers that are really concerned with data from external sources, or support providers that are specialized in some sort of specific field. So we think that there will be a multitude of organizations in this space, and we really were honored to be part of this group and come together to open up FHIR to many more organizations in the world. And the last piece that I wanted to mention is that this is truly like a world-class group. James's team has the best, open source FHIR server. Rian's team is leading FHIR Dev Days. Sandy's team is doing a lot around testing and interoperability among these FHIR servers. So I think there is a lot of coverage that our teams are supporting. And I think, Wayne and the HL7 community have really brought FHIR in with open arms and made it a much bigger thing than I think it could have been alone. So we're really excited to be part of this.
Okay, thank you, Ricky. And do we have Sandy there? I see a telephone line that's muted at the moment. You've been able to join, Sandy?
Apologize for that.
Oh, all right. We were just asking everyone to list, say a few opening remarks of their organization, what they do, how they contribute to the collaboration, and why you joined.
Sure. So Aegis is the developer of the Touchstone Test Platform. It's an open access FHIR testing platform that basically allows developers to test not just the base FHIR resources through our validation engine that comes straight from Graham's validation engine, but also implementation guides, so profiles that have been put together. And we have been working with some of the FHIR accelerators to help them advance the work that they're doing in their collaborations by enabling them to validate their development as they go. So kind of a test-driven development approach to really work with those who are adopting FHIR and help them keep the standard and not have differences in how they implement the fire resources and implementation guides. So that's what we do. And as far as our involvement in the Fireball, the Fire Business Alliance, I think that we really recognize a greater need in the industry as fire has become normative to employ the tools that we have, as well as our partners here at Fireball have, and help drive the industry forward to make this new standard the way of the future. Obviously, with the new federal regulations that have come out, the adoption is going to happen at a very rapid pace over the next couple of years, and we want to help the market get this right and to get fire right. And so I think that those of us who have been involved organizationally since the beginning of fire really want to help share our lessons learned and help others do fire right.
Oh, well, thank you. And James, having introduced Dharma here, I also have Echo sitting by my side. He happens to be sound asleep, which I hope is not a comment on the quality of the session so far, but it's often the case anyway.
And where are you, Wayne?
I'm in Orlando. I'm sorry, I'm not in Orlando. I'm in Hollywood, Florida, about 3 hours southeast of Orlando. And it's sun's about peaking, ready to peak out, but enjoying it very much here this winter. So I was probably the last person standing who would have made it to HIMSS had they not canceled, since I only had to drive there and not have to get on a plane. So in any event, we're all sort of trying to pick up the pieces. And again, we didn't have any time to rehearse this, so give us a little slack as we try to figure out the pieces. But actually, it's a pretty great program that's coming up. And looking forward to picking up those pieces. So the next question I'd like to ask is, on a practical basis, what do you see the collaboration offering, and why should the people on this call care, essentially? So maybe we can pass that one around a little bit. We talked more broadly about what your companies do and the benefits of it, but really what does it amount to, and where do you see it going over the next few years?
So who would you like to comment, Wayne?
Well, go ahead, Rien, why don't you lead off?
Okay, yeah, of course. Well, thank you. So, well, first, our first public appearance would have been HIMSS if it wouldn't have been canceled, of course. And this is a good example of what we do. We are a marketing collaborative, so we work together on marketing and sharing a booth at HIMSS and talking about fire and why fire is important and how we collaborate is one of the things that we do. There's lots of other things that we that are on our list to do, like other events, both in America and in Europe. We will issue white papers, statements. We will talk about joint propositions, see where we can collaborate on client projects, et cetera, et cetera. So it will be more like a marketing effort than a technical effort. But given the fact that we work together will give us more, well, let's say, power to reach out to the market and say how important it is. Will we take on new members? Yes, we will. That's something we've been focusing on HIMSS, of course, and the announcement. And after HIMSS, we will discuss how we take. We actually, when we announced the collaboration, we got a lot of response from companies who sympathize with the ideas and want to join the alliance. And we will come out with criteria and a policy on how we take on new members shortly.
Anybody wants to comment on that a little bit? James, your
sure.
point.
I'll take a crack at it. So I guess, to take the other side of that coin, which is the why should people care about what Fireball is and what it brings to the table. I think it's fair to say that fire right now is at an inflection point. I mean, I feel like I've probably felt and been saying that and heard other people say that since the dawn of FHIR, but maybe we could say this time it's actually true if it hasn't been true before. You know, there's just this amazing sort of, like the whole health system is sort of pivoting right now towards this sort of model of consumer engagement and patient empowerment. These are themes that you hear sort of well outside the space of interoperability, sort of around health more broadly, but of course all of that permeates through healthcare as well. Technology is certainly reaching a point where cell phone technology and things like that are not completely ubiquitous, but are widely available and certainly are a part of the mix of how we bring patients into that. APIs are transforming every industry as you know, as we go. These microservice architectures and things are becoming more and more ubiquitous everywhere you go. And of course, healthcare is no exception to that. And then of course we have this incredible set of new regulations that have just been announced by the United States. I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right in that the United States is now the first jurisdiction in the entire world that has sort of a mandated consumer access via API to health data sort of set of regulations in force. And I mean, I think that's awesome. I live in Canada personally, where we have no such regulation. And, you know, if I'm honest, I don't think we're likely to get such a regulation anytime soon. So the events in the United States right now are light at the end of the tunnel to me. I think this is the US healthcare system showing the world the way things should be, which is kind of a neat concept for all kinds of reasons. As we figure out, as the entire world figures out, how do we bring the patients, the humans into the equation? Obviously APIs are a big part of that, and naturally FHIR is a big part of that, which brings me back to the sort of point of why does Fireball matter? These are really hard problems, and they're really hard problems for any one company to solve on their own. The biggest EHR vendor and the smallest startup in the world, like neither of them are going to be able to solve these big problems on their own. The only way we're going to get there is through great sort of broad spectrum collaborations. And that's kind of the aim with Fireball, is to provide, to sort of bring this community together of companies who are like-minded, share vision, and want to sort of help each other get there. You know, as Ricky sort of said, this is kind of a rising tide floats all boats situations where we do see that collaboration is probably the only path to solving these big problems at all, which is why it's important to all of us, and I think why it should be important to everyone.
The thing that I wanted to add there is that it's FHIR is now, it's not a tiny thing anymore. There are literally, thousands, nearly 10,000 FHIR endpoints available through these EHRs and health systems that the EHRs are implemented at. And there are, hundreds of other or thousands of other companies that are already plugged into FHIR with some regard. So it's not, it is now truly, the inflection point where the data is there, people are getting connected, and now we're talking about how are you actually going to use this data? The connectivity problem, I wouldn't say it's solved completely. There are still nuances and issues with connecting to various FHIR servers, which Sandy can help us all iron out. But I think the data is there, it's available. And now the next step is how are we going to get people to build more interesting things on top of it?
Yeah, I think it's also, as I said earlier, I think it's a sign of maturity in the market for FHIR. And the reality is that in order to put data in the hands of patients so they can do useful things as well as more things for providers to do, right now it's highly dependent on the EHRs, or historically it's been highly dependent on the EHRs. And that's not an easy market to break into. And so what the advent of FHIR-based APIs, as the ONC rule clearly and CMS rules clearly indicate, is it's opening up the economy. It's encouraging more entrepreneurial solutions that can work together to try to do things that were too hard or impossible for one big organization to solve at one time, but also make it more feasible for startups and companies with bright new ideas to get going, just like we saw in the whole app economy that Apple introduced with the iTunes store way back in the App Store. And so we're looking forward to this. Certainly Ken Mandel and the Smart On and Josh Mandel and the Smart On Fire community have had this vision for a long time. I think it's really, again, like many of us have said, it's really an exciting time to see it just growing and rapidly exploding actually before our eyes. So I'm not sure if, I'm not really seeing chat questions here. There's a couple more points I'd like to cover, but I'm wondering, I'm not sure, Heather, if you're covering for the webinar, but are there questions coming in on YouTube or should we just keep going? We'll keep going.
No questions yet. There are people commenting, but no questions yet.
No questions yet. That's good to know. Thank you, Ricky. So let's spend a couple minutes just talking about how Fireball fits into the overall landscape of healthcare interoperability and FHIR. The FHIR standards is an HL7 product. It originated as a project where HL7 was looking at a better way to develop standards using newer technologies, and Graham put that together and made a proposal where it was established as an HL7 product, I think back in 2011. It took a long way to get to work from many, many contributors. I think what Graham brought to the picture was a number of transformational changes to HL7, basically introducing the notion of open source collaboration, which broadened the participation in standards development, and particularly the focus on implementers, which allowed people like the people on this call to basically get their hands in. And it kind of transformed the whole way we do standards, where historically you sort of figured out a problem, made your best guess on what to do about it, publish some sort of document, and then see what happened. FHIR flipped that model completely around, and let's figure out what to do by trying it out and actually building working things, and then release the standard once we know it's actually working, that it actually solves problems, that it's testing, that it's been tested and it's better than it is before. So it is important to sort of look at the landscape. We started with the FHIR. HL7 is the SDO that owns the trademark and owns the IP and developed, basically was the baseline environment for developing the standard. But then we broaden out to the implementer community through connectathons, through the chat channels, through multiple ways of getting thousands of people who normally wouldn't be involved historically in our other standards activity, actively getting their hands dirty and building these things and making them happen. What we're seeing now is, as we're getting closer to, as we're getting more focused on actually putting FHIR to work in production applications, that we have, another layer out there, which is the actual implementation landscape, which affects, as Dave Shaver might say, hundreds of thousands of developers and implementers and integrators are actually putting the pieces together and making them work. And I think from my perspective, that's how collaborations like this can help, giving people multiple opportunities. I think a lot of organizations depend entirely on the EHR vendors, which is very important, but it's going to really change the world, that it's really going to be more of an open environment where lots of people can participate. Anyone want to comment on that and tell me what I said wrong? Oh, one more piece, the FHIR Foundation, I think, Rien, you mentioned as well. And the FHIR Foundation is it's actually the HL7 FHIR Foundation. It's a separate 501c3 charitable organization that was established principally to help people use and implement FHIR no matter where they are, whether they're tied to the HL7 organization or not. So it's definitely, it was created by HL7. It's definitely a close partner organization with HL7, but it's trying to extend the reach a little bit for groups that may not be working as closely with the HL7 environment. So we want to keep those things separate, but let's talk about a little more about how this collaboration can really make a difference to help customers, what it will mean to them in particular. And I don't know who wants to go first here. Sandy, you were the last to join, so I will let you start this time.
So I think that we have a great opportunity here to really share, as I said before, our lessons learned from our implementations and all of the work that we've done since the very beginning. And so to your point about FHIR being a standard that's trying to come up with the solutions before we have big problems, I think it's important that we're out there evangelizing the work that we've done and how we can help the industry implement this stuff. So I think that that's really what we you know, we want to change the world, right? That's what FHIR's been all about since the beginning. And I think that having these organizations that have been so deep in it, sharing what we've done and helping others get it right is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to comment on that in general? All right, we're thinking.
Yeah, I can say a few words. About what you said about the initial principles of the FHIR standard within HL7, Wayne. And of course, in the US, with the final rules by CMS and ONC, there's a lot of momentum. It's creating a lot of momentum. And I think it's hard to overestimate the impact of the final rules, which, by the way, is happening in other countries as well. Here in Europe, we see a lot of uptake in Scandinavia and recently in Germany. But personally, I believe that this is not the main cause of the rise of FHIR, and we should not change cause and effect here. I think what you said about how FHIR originated and the principles that underpin FHIR, like the developer first approach, the 80% rule, the 80% coverage of the data model rule, throwing out the draft standards and not waiting until the normative standard was there. The very pragmatic approach, those are very appealing, have been very appealing to developers ever since the beginning. And I think the main reason why we see such an uptake for FHIR is that developers like the standard and the technology, and there's a lot of tools available. And so I think that although the regulation is very important, I think that the main drivers for the success were written in the original manifesto that was pinned to the wall of the three architects, Graham, Lloyd, and Ewout, who started with FHIR, and that are still very valid until today. And just for a thought experiment, I think that the US government has rightly seen the opportunity that it has rightly seen how FHIR can be used to reach their policy goals. And it would be hard to imagine a similar final rule by the ONC and CMS if FHIR hadn't been there. If it were based on CDA. I think if the developers don't like the technology, it's useless. And I think that's still the main driver for the success of FHIR.
All right. So let's move on to something else. We have the Netherlands and Canada represented. There's a lot of excitement here in the USA with the issuance of the final rules. Give us some input. And I know both Ricky and Sandy also work with companies in other countries. Give us a little view of what you see going on in the international community, and whether what happens in the U.S. might have a ripple effect to be encourage other governments to work similarly, and how it affects the collaboration as well.
So a little sense of, I'm happy to talk a little bit about the Canadian experience up here. I mean, Canada, frankly, these days we are a little bit slow on the uptake of these sorts of technologies, if I'm completely honest about that. And I mean, a lot of that is sort of, I don't know, bad experience with previous implementations and things like that. And a part of that is just sort of a conservative culture of sort of, wanting to let other people go first, and then us try the things we know works. That's pretty fundamental to the Canadian ethos. We are very proud of our health system up here, though, and it has some interesting sort of angles. We are, of course, a single payer country, and are sort of divided into 12 health systems amongst our provinces here in Canada. One of the interesting things that I always think is kind of a neat differentiator of our system is the way we do interoperability. Fundamentally in Canada, interoperability is all around jurisdictional repositories, which is a concept that exists, of course, in other places. We didn't invent them, but we do the heck out of them up here. What I mean by jurisdictional repositories, here in the province of Ontario, where I live, for example, we have got provincial repositories where almost every single lab test gets replicated into. We've got provincial drug repositories where one by one, we're bringing every sort of ordering system, every pharmacy dispensing system, and getting them integrated into a central repository. And we're doing this across every domain where it makes sense to. We're talking about imaging, we're talking about immunizations, we're talking about encounter records and emergency reports, public health, family medicine. One by one, we're sort of building up these centralized repositories that sort of form this really interesting basis for a longitudinal health record for the citizens of our province and our country. The fascinating thing, there are lots of projects. I don't mean to say that there is no FHIR going on in Canada. That would be completely incorrect. There's lots of projects going on, but I don't know that we've yet completely tapped the potential of the way that we've oriented interoperability in the first place. And I think one of these days, we're going to reach a point where where we're building FHIR APIs on top of these jurisdictional repositories, and all of a sudden creating a sort of a really fascinating ecosystem where potentially if you get consumers into the mix and allow people in there, they've got a complete longitudinal view of every bit of health data that's ever been collected about them, regardless of where they've moved around in the country, regardless of which specialties they've required access to, regardless of what types of testing they've had. Like all of that could all of a sudden be unlocked. Fascinatingly there too, I mean, this is another area where one person can't go it alone. Interoperability, of course, is a big part of the problem there, but you get into how do we unlock that type of thing, and all of a sudden you've got to bring identity management into the picture, and there's all kinds of people working on that type of problem. You've got the issues of sort of terminology normalization across massive groups of people. You've got the issues of how you do testing and conformance certification at really huge scale. There's all these really fascinating problems that, again, one person would never be able to solve. Sort of bringing me back to this notion that it truly will have to be a broad community effort if we're going to tackle that. But I think it's also a huge, as I say, community opportunity up here in Canada.
Thanks, James. So I think we have time for, I'm going to ask Rien to comment on that briefly. I think we probably only have time for one more question, which I'll pose after that. Because I know we have some transition time, Ricky, until our next panel, which is coming up in a few minutes. So Rien, do you want to comment on the international perspective of what you've seen with FHIR and whether the rules have had any impact, or you think they may have any impact on adoption?
Yeah, so first of all, the United States, you're not alone. We see similar things in European countries as well. Like here in the Netherlands, we have legislation which is now open for consultation, like the proposed rule has been for the last, 6 months in the United States, which is all around personal health records. And there's being built a whole infrastructure here in the Netherlands for personal health records, which is also around patient data access. In Germany, there was a law announced, which is called the Patientendatenschutzgesetz, which means something like, Patient Data Protection Act, which is also about patient data access. So we see similar things here in Europe going on. And the funny thing is that if 5 years ago it would have been, so is there any standards that is going to be prescribed, or is it left in the open, or is it V3 or CDA, or is it IHE? But now there's no discussion. It's all based on FHIR. So you see a lot of things going on that are very similar to what's happening in the United States.
That's really good news, and that's really exciting. So the last question I'd like to pose to you is, let's take a look forward where you see things going from whatever perspective you'd like, and where you see the collaborative going. And do you see your products possibly getting more closely integrated or pulled together? And give me a few words. Why don't you go first, Ricky?
Yeah, so I do think that there is potential for more collaboration on the technical level between our organizations. I mean, we're doing, part of the way that we've architected things is fundamentally different from the way that others have. But I think that as we may, work with customers that are, using us for various pieces, there may be more room for collaboration there. And I think that this next, few years is really about the use cases for FHIR. So I believe that there will be essentially not really a forking, but additional layers built on top of the FHIR and HL7 infrastructure that will enable those use cases, from like pop health to analytics to machine learning to maybe containerized applications or other, things that are not truly FHIR, but they're all building on top of it. And I think we saw some of that, with the standardization of the bulk data export spec. We may see other things being pulled in and standardized and then implemented that would allow us to collaborate more closely on the technical side.
Thanks, Ricky. And that seemed to be a nice segue for you, James, about the value of repositories and getting data together. 1 minute, please, since we're getting close to the end of our session. Give me a 1 minute update.
Sure. Yeah. No, I see a question in the chat. Is in Canada, is all data in repositories stored as FHIR, and what's going on worldwide? And I will say almost no. The quick answer to that is our repositories in Canada they predate FHIR, frankly, or at least were designed before FHIR was a big thing. And that's a big part of the challenge, actually, is figuring out how do we bolt FHIR onto existing systems. And I think that, if we really want to look at what is the challenge worldwide, it's how do we bring the value, unlock the value of FHIR without having to rewrite every last thing we've done. And that, I think, is where our challenges are going to be in the next year.
Thanks, James. Rien, 1 minute final response. And Sandy will be last.
Yeah, well, actually, about the collaboration between the companies on a product level, we already do projects for clients where we work together, for instance, with Aegis here in the Netherlands, where our products are being used side by side. And actually, the whole idea of FHIR is that and that's, by the way, one of the principles of the FHIR Business Alliance, that we build products that avoid vendor lock-in. So, in the extreme, you have the Smile CDR FHIR server, and there's the Firely FHIR server, but they both comply to the FHIR API. So a client should be able to get to his data, or even get the FHIR server of one company out and replace it by the FHIR server of another company. I know it's not that easy in practice, but that's the whole idea. There's no vendor lock-in. And we stick to the FHIR API, to the FHIR standard, and that means that the client is in control.
Thanks, Reid. And Sandy, you get the last word.
Yeah, great. So, I think to your earlier point about international uptake, Wayne, what we're seeing in terms of organizations and validating FHIR, everyone knows we need to go to APIs, right? And that this is going to advance the sharing of data and help with no vendor lock-in in these things. And I think that when we start seeing regulations, and it's not just here in the US, the Netherlands has a government program called MedMe that is currently validating EHR transactions against the FHIR standard. The Digital Health Service in Ontario is working to set something similar up. So it's very real. It's going to only grow in terms of the volume of work that is to be done to help organizations implement. So the idea of how we work together, I think it's almost sort of a cooperation sort of situation where, yes, we are all discrete businesses. However, we know that our best chance of success is working together to promote that FHIR standard and the principles of the underlying FHIR community.
Very nice closing remark. Couldn't have done it better. Thank you all. This was great fun. Let's try to do it again sometime. Ricky, thanks again. Back to you.
Yep. Thanks, guys. It was a lot of fun for sure.